You've been walking through life armored, not because you're fearless, but because you're tired of bleeding in public. You say you don't care, but that's a lie. You just cared too much for too long, and it broke something in you. Now you flinch when people get close. You hide in plain sight. And somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that silence equals strength. But protection isn't the same as healing. Your numbness is not peace, it's a slow suffocation. You've mastered the art of survival, but forgotten how to feel without fear. You've built walls so high that not even you can hear the sound of your own soul inside them. But this ends now, not with vengeance, not with noise, but with the quiet decision to take your power back, not by being untouched, but by being unbreakable. Don't just hear this, confront it. And if it stings a little, it means it's already working. You mistook armor for identity. You didn't become powerful. You became hidden, not a warrior, a witness to your own suppression. What you call strength was never forged in fire. It was frozen in fear. And every layer of armor you wear, it wasn't built to protect you. It was built to prevent anyone from ever knowing how deeply you were bleeding. You walk into rooms unreadable, untouchable, unshakable, but beneath that silence is a scream you've convinced yourself the world doesn't deserve to hear. You didn't learn to thrive. You learned to disappear behind performance. And now you wear your detachment like a badge. But let's call it what it is. An identity stitched together from old wounds you still haven't looked at. Armor is not identity. It's abandonment in disguise. Helen Keller was locked inside a world without sound, without speech, a prison of silence. But she didn't harden. She didn't shut down. She let touch. Raw, intimate, vulnerable touch become the language that freed her. Now ask yourself, when did you stop letting life touch you? You didn't choose armor because you're strong. You chose it because you're exhausted. You were tired of breaking open, tired of trusting hands that dropped you, tired of being asked to explain pain to people who only wanted to dissect it, not hold it. So you built distance. You called it maturity. You built composure. You called it control. You buried your sensitivity and called it growth. But no one taught you this. The more armor you wear, the more you forget what your skin feels like. Joan of Arc didn't win because she wore chainmail. She won because her conviction bled through it. They burned her body, but they never reached her spirit. That's real identity. Not what you build to hide your wounds, but what you choose to reveal in spite of them. Here's the truth you've avoided. You've mistaken emotional disconnection for wisdom. You think shutting down is the same as rising above. But wisdom doesn't hide. Wisdom exposes. It teaches through scar tissue, not shields. You didn't become safe. You just became distant. And now you stand at a crossroads. Keep wearing armor that keeps you untouched. Or finally learn what it means to live unarmored and unashamed. To walk back into the world, not invisible, but invincible. Because nothing outside of you gets to define you anymore. Every mask you wear strangles the voice you were born to speak with. So here's your reckoning. Will you keep calling your numbness peace? Will you keep mistaking your silence for discipline? Will you keep living armored, admired, respected, and completely unknown? Or will you finally strip it down and meet the person underneath it all? Because that's the only version of you destiny will recognize, and everything else, just armor that was never meant to last. So the question remains, will you keep polishing the armor, or will you finally rebuild the soul it was meant to protect? They didn't break you. You froze yourself. You say you're numb because of what they did. But numbness is not something the world imposes. It's something the soul chooses when it no longer trusts itself to feel. They wounded you, yes. But the freezing, that was your survival. That was your strategy. That was the moment you decided, I will not break. I will disappear instead. You didn't collapse. You congealed. You didn't scream. You stiffened. You buried the sound. And in that silence, you lost your voice. Comfort sedates. Discomfort sculpts. You weren't shattered. You shut down. And now, years later, you walk like stone. You respond with delay. You feel with caution. You don't react because you're calm. You don't react because you've been practicing emotional amputation for so long. You forgot what it feels like to bleed and heal. You call it peace. But it's just a well-rehearsed pause. Think of Helen Keller, trapped in silence not by choice but by biology. Yet even she, blind and deaf, found a way back to sensation, back to language, back to light. And here you are, with all your faculties intact, yet choosing to live emotionally mute because somewhere along the way, you believed the lie. Feeling equals weakness. Numbness equals control. But numbness is not neutrality. It is neglect, and neglect, even when self-inflicted, becomes a form of internal violence. You froze, because thawing would mean remembering, remembering would mean reliving, and reliving would mean finally facing that it wasn't just what they did, it was what you did next. You agreed with the pain. You accepted the verdict. Not good enough, not worth fighting for, not worth protecting. You didn't need to disappear. You needed to be held. but nobody came. So you held your breath instead, and you've been holding it ever since. Tesla once said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy. So let's talk about yours. Frozen energy is blocked destiny. The dream is still there, behind the ice. The calling is still alive, but muffled under frost. You are not broken. You are paused, but make no mistake, time does not pause with you. And one day you will wake up and realize your numbness didn't protect you. It robbed you. You don't need another routine. You don't need another affirmation. You need the courage to feel again, to thaw what you silenced, to walk back into that emotional tundra and unfreeze the version of you that never got to grow. That child is still there, mid-sentence, mid-sob, mid-hope, waiting for you to return. You didn't escape the pain. You just exiled your potential. And now the decision sits before you. Will you keep polishing your frozen cage? Or will you break the glass and begin to melt? If Helen Keller found her voice in total silence, what excuse do you still have for living muted? Every scar is still making decisions for you. You think you moved on. You think because you don't cry about it anymore, it's over. But healing isn't silence. It's the ability to make a decision today that isn't controlled by yesterday. And you haven't done that yet. You say no to new love because of the betrayal you never unpacked. You say yes to comfort because failure still echoes in your chest like it happened yesterday. You don't trust people because you never trusted yourself to survive the next disappointment. The scar didn't just close, it calcified your judgment. You're not discerning, you're just still bleeding in a way the world can't see. Harriet Tubman didn't wait for trust to feel safe again. She acted while bleeding, while grieving, while hunted. Her scars didn't make her hesitate, they made her clear. She wasn't healed when she turned back for others, she was haunted, but she used it. And that's the difference. Most people try to avoid the ghost, you try to bury it, but ghosts don't die when you ignore them. They take the wheel, and now you're not making decisions. Your damage is. You want new results, but you're still consulting old wounds. Scarred minds create safe choices, and safe choices kill destiny. That scar, it became a compass, but not the kind that points toward truth, the kind that points away from anything that resembles the pain that made it. You avoid conflict not because you're peaceful, but because the last one broke your spirit. You over-explain yourself not because you value clarity, but because someone once made you feel like your voice was dangerous. You delay action not because you're lazy, but because the last time you moved fast, you crashed. And now you live like a burned hand, flinching at heat, even when the fire's not real. Thomas Edison failed 10,000 times, but failure didn't make his decisions. Faith did, because he didn't let the memory of the burn tell him he could never hold the light. But you still let the injury parent the ambition. Your scars are not disqualifications, they are invitations to either go numb or go nuclear with awareness. So ask yourself, when you say, I'm fine, are you speaking from truth? Or from the wound that taught you silence feels safer than exposure? When you walk away from new opportunity, are you walking toward integrity or just avoiding anything that might reopen the cut? You keep praying for clarity, but you can't hear truth through trauma. So the question is not whether you're hurt. The question is, how long will you keep letting your injuries make your choices for you? Because if you don't decide, your damage already has. You traded vulnerability for control. You weren't born guarded. You were born open, eyes wide, heart soft, trusting the world to meet you gently. But somewhere between the betrayals and the broken promises, you made a quiet decision. A decision that safety matters more than sincerity. And from that moment on, you began to trade your truth for tactics. You started speaking carefully, smiling strategically, loving selectively. Because you learned, control protects. And vulnerability? It exposes. But what if I told you, you didn't evolve? You adapted. Not upward, inward. Not into power, into performance. You've become a sculptor of perception, a curator of distance. And every interaction is a transaction, engineered, measured, filtered through fear. You've mastered the art of looking strong while silently suffocating. Helen Keller could not see or hear, but she never stopped feeling. She taught us that connection is not about perception, it's about presence. And the moment you began choosing control over presence, you began losing access to your own soul. Because control isn't freedom, it's a fortress. It keeps out harm, yes, but it also keeps out healing. You don't just block pain, you block intimacy, joy, belonging. You can't receive love while managing its optics. And deep down, you know it. You know that every time someone tries to get close, you retreat into precision. You get polished instead of present, efficient instead of emotional, safe instead of seen. It's not that you don't want to be known. It's that you're terrified that if you are, they'll leave with the truth and never return. But what kind of life is that? Joan of Arc didn't command armies through control. She did it through conviction, not through safety, but through surrender. She walked into fire not because she knew the outcome, but because she trusted the mission. Her power was not her armor, it was her exposure. She bled belief, and so must you. Control is a beautiful cage. You decorate it with self-sufficiency. Call it strength. Convince yourself it's freedom. But a golden cage is still a prison. Even if the door is open, you forgot how to leave. You've become a puppet master of your own emotions, pulling strings to keep everything tidy, impressive, distant. But now the strings are tangled, and the performance is exhausting. You filter your words, you manage your tone, you rehearse your feelings, and you call that connection? That's not connection. That's choreography. You didn't outgrow vulnerability. You outsourced it. And now, no one knows the real you, not even you. It's time to decide. Will you keep curating your life like a museum, beautiful, silent, untouched? Or will you live like a battlefield, messy, sacred, real? Because real power isn't found in control. It's found in the courage to be known anyway. So tell me, will you keep controlling the story to avoid pain? Or will you finally live the story that might just set you free? You keep people close enough to admire, far enough to never touch. You say you're independent. You say you don't need anyone. But the truth is, you've just made isolation look poetic. You've mastered the art of proximity without intimacy, of appearing open while being emotionally barricaded. You let people get close enough to applaud the image, but never close enough to witness the fracture. Because if they got close enough, they'd see it. The fear, the mistrust, the ache of someone who once reached out and got burned. So now you smile with boundaries, you laugh with distance, and you've convinced yourself that safety is more sacred than connection. But safety without vulnerability is just solitude wearing lipstick. You live like a museum exhibit, admired, untouched, and tragically alone. Nelson Mandela once said, "There is no passion to be found in playing small." But playing small isn't always about dreams. Sometimes it's about how little of yourself you allow others to access. He spent 27 years behind bars, and yet when he walked free, he chose connection over resentment. He didn't build walls, he dismantled them. Can you say the same? Because right now you're not protecting your peace. You're withholding your presence. You sit at dinners, surrounded by noise, yet spiritually absent. You answer texts but avoid connection. You exist in the room but remain hidden behind emotional one-way mirrors. Distance is not healing, it's just the scar pretending to be skin. What you're doing, it's not strength, it's strategy. A life built on preemptive retreat. You want closeness, but only on your terms. Only if there's no chance of being abandoned again. Only if you're the one who leaves first. But love doesn't work that way. Intimacy doesn't bend to control. And healing doesn't come through spectatorship. It comes through surrender. Think of Helen Keller, a woman born into darkness and silence. Yet she reached across the void, not just to learn words, but to feel known. It wasn't language that saved her. It was touch, human contact, someone willing to step inside her silence and stay. That's what you've locked yourself away from. And until you unlock that door, every connection you make will be a stage performance, applauded from afar, forgotten in private. You're the lighthouse that guides ships safely ashore, but never lets anyone dock. Beautiful from a distance, unreachable by design. You must ask yourself, is your independence a declaration of power or a disguise for your fear of being known? You don't fear rejection, you fear recognition, that someone might actually see the real you and walk away anyway. So tell me, when will you stop performing presence and start living connection? Because the applause is fading, and the mask is heavy, and the version of you hiding behind glass was never meant to survive alone. Will you finally let someone in, or will you die admired but untouched? The pain you ignore becomes the pattern. You repeat. You keep thinking you left it behind. The betrayal, the silence, the rejection. You walked away, changed your number, buried the memory under distractions and dreams. But pain doesn't dissolve just because you delete the evidence. It relocates, it rewires. It doesn't haunt you like a ghost. It becomes you. And before you realize it, you're reenacting your own suffering in every new environment. Calling it coincidence, calling it just how you are. This is not growth, it's a performance. A reenactment of wounds left untreated. Harriet Tubman didn't just escape slavery, she returned again and again to pull others through their darkness. She didn't heal and hide, she understood. Freedom is incomplete if your mind is still chained to the moment you won't speak about. And right now, your silence is the real captor. The world doesn't see the war inside you, but your habits do, your relationships do, your dreams do. You wonder why you flinch when someone gets close, why you sabotage intimacy, delay decisions, overthink simple actions. It's not because you're broken. It's because you're repeating a lesson you refuse to confront. The wound became the teacher, and you never graduated. Avoided pain is not peace. It's just procrastinated suffering, scheduled to show up when your guard is down. You say, "This is just who I am," but no. This is who you became after the impact. Helen Keller's greatest war wasn't with blindness or deafness. It was with the isolation. the inner scream of a soul that couldn't yet speak. And when Anne Sullivan placed her hand under running water, it wasn't just language that was born, it was resurrection. It was the moment a girl buried inside silence chose to come back to life. You've been handed the same water. You just keep refusing to touch it, because touching it means remembering. Remembering means feeling, and feeling means facing what you've spent years burying under achievement and independence. But listen carefully. Buried pain becomes behavioral cycles. It turns into how you distance yourself when people care, how you over-deliver to avoid being abandoned, how you numb joy to preempt disappointment. You call it maturity, but it's fear with a professional wardrobe. What you ignore, you inherit. You are not just reacting to the present, you are echoing the past. And until you stop, your future will be nothing but a looping whisper of your unfinished wounds. Unhealed doesn't mean forgotten, it means repeated, in disguise. So now comes the question you've been avoiding. Will you finally face the original wound, or will you keep pretending that repetition is fate and not choice? Because the world didn't do this to you, your patterns did. So ask yourself, will you finally confront the pain, or will you keep teaching your future to bleed from a cut it never received? Your inner child is still waiting for someone to apologize. You became an adult. You learned how to navigate rooms, manage calendars, build careers, make small talk, and suppress earthquakes behind your eyes. But somewhere inside, beneath the posture, beneath the voice you've trained to sound composed, there's still a child. And that child isn't confused. He's not angry. He's just waiting for someone to say it. You didn't deserve that. Waiting for the apology that never came, the explanation that was never offered. Not because he needs pity, but because silence made him think the pain was his fault. Pain that isn't acknowledged becomes identity. You were never handed closure. You were handed silence and told to make peace with it. But silence isn't peace. It's an inheritance of confusion. It's a locked room with no air, where your innocence still sits, cross-legged on the floor, rehearsing what it could have done differently. And that's the tragedy. The world moved on, but you stayed there. You learned how to function, but not how to release. You became competent, but never truly free. Think of Helen Keller. Not the symbol of inspiration, but the child before the miracle. Frustrated, isolated, misunderstood, trapped in a world without language, until one hand, dipped in water, spelled truth into her palm. She wasn't given freedom. She recognized it. You've been in that same silence, but instead of learning to feel again, you learned to pretend, to laugh loud enough to cover the echo of what was never said, to move on without ever actually moving through. You thought forgetting was strength, but it was just emotional amnesia. The child inside you doesn't need justice. He needs recognition, because what was done to you was not discipline. It was damage. What was said to you wasn't truth. It was projection. And what was withheld from you, love, protection, safety, you've been trying to earn from the world ever since. But the world cannot repay what it did not take. That apology will not come. Not from the parent, not from the teacher, not from the friend who vanished when you needed them most. So now the burden is sacred. You must become both the wounded and the healer. You must walk back into that memory, not to relive it, but to rewrite your role in it. Healing begins when you stop waiting to be rescued. Because if you don't offer yourself the words you needed back then, you'll keep building relationships that feel like punishment, not partnership. You'll keep mistaking pain for connection. You'll keep reenacting abandonment in prettier settings. You are the author holding the pen, still pretending the ink belongs to someone else. Still waiting for a ghost to finish your chapter. But ghosts don't write endings, they only haunt unwritten ones. So here's the truth. Nobody is coming to say it, but maybe it's time you looked in the mirror and whispered, you didn't deserve it, but you do deserve to heal. The apology you've been waiting for must come from your own courage. So the real question is this: will you keep handing your future to the silence of your past, or will you finally become the voice your younger self needed to hear? You call it growth, but it's just emotional hiding. You tell yourself you've outgrown them. You say you're protecting your peace. You post mantras about elevation, detachment, and cutting off low vibration people. But tell me, why does it still ache at 2 a.m.? Why does your silence feel so loud? You didn't grow, you retreated, you didn't ascend, you disappeared. Not into greatness, into emotional quarantine, where no one can reach you. And more importantly, where no one can reject you. Growth isn't walking away. It's staying long enough to see your patterns and breaking them. You didn't heal. You built a fortress, one that looks like strength from the outside, but inside, it's a museum of pain you never unpacked. just reorganized. And the worst part, you convinced yourself it's maturity. It's not. It's emotional exile with a spiritual label. Think of Nikola Tesla, a genius ahead of his time whose brilliance isolated him. He created worlds inside his mind but died alone in a hotel room, feeding pigeons, more connected to their presence than to people. Not because he wasn't capable of connection, but because his world had become safer in solitude. And that's where you are now. Your solitude isn't sacred, it's a disguise. You've stopped risking closeness, not because you don't crave it, but because you don't trust yourself to survive another rupture. You don't fear abandonment, you fear being seen before you're left, so you hide behind focus, behind goals, behind a schedule so full there's no room for truth to slip in. But productivity is not healing, and being busy is not being better. You're just distracting yourself with progress. You planted a garden, but never stepped outside to touch it, because growth terrified you once it meant vulnerability, so you watered it from the window, and called yourself a gardener. You've labeled your fear as discernment, your distrust as wisdom, your numbness as boundaries. But you don't need stronger walls, you need deeper roots. Not in performance, but in presence. Not in strategy, but in stillness. You're not protecting your energy, you're avoiding your origin. The place where it first hurt. The place where you first learned that being open meant being shattered. But listen, isolation is not elevation. It's just pain wearing a crown. And until you walk back into your own heart and stop calling it a battlefield, you will never know the kind of growth that doesn't require hiding. So now you must ask, is your so-called growth leading you higher? Or is it just a prettier name for your fear of being known? Strength without softness is just another form of fear. You pride yourself on being unshaken. You walk through fire and call it focus. You keep your voice steady, your face unreadable, your heart armored in silence, and the world applauds. They call you strong. But let's tell the truth, it's not strength. It's fear, sculpted into silence. Somewhere along the way, you decided that softness was a threat, that to feel was to crumble, that to ask for comfort was to invite betrayal. So you built yourself like a fortress, impenetrable, unreachable. But what kind of victory is that when no one, not even you, can enter? You became strong by subtraction, but in doing so, you lost the very parts of yourself that made you human. You think you've evolved, but what you've done is disappear. Look at Joan of Arc, a teenage girl who defied armies, kingdoms, and death itself. But her power didn't come from brutality. It came from unshakable faith and a heart that still wept for the people she led. Her tears weren't weakness. They were the proof she hadn't let war kill her soul. You can be soft and still be sacred. You can bend and not break. You can feel and still lead. Real strength isn't the absence of emotion. It's the refusal to be ruled by fear of it. But you silence the parts of yourself that tremble. You cut off the ache before it becomes a sentence. You've made discomfort your enemy instead of your initiation. You call it discipline, but really, it's emotional avoidance. You are a stone house built in a storm. Steady, sure, but cold to the touch. People see your structure and respect it, but no one lives inside, because warmth was sacrificed for armor, and now you're sheltering no one, not even yourself. You weren't born to be untouchable. You were born to be true, and the truth is, your soul isn't a sword, it's a vessel, and vessels crack, not to shatter but to pour. So cry, shake, ache, let the walls sweat, let the voice shake, let the tears fall where your fists used to clench, not because you're weak, but because you're finally safe enough to feel without apology. Hardness is a costume. Wholeness is the real crown. Stop trying to earn love by pretending you don't need it. Stop mistaking numbness for power. You don't have to prove anything to a world that taught you silence was survival. You get to reclaim softness as strategy, as divinity, as truth. So I ask you, will you keep parading your pain as strength? Or will you finally let the strength be in your softness, where your soul never had to hide in the first place? You didn't heal. You just learned how to perform stability. You're not okay, but you've mastered how to look like it. You show up on time, you return messages, you laugh when expected, and no one suspects that beneath the rhythm of your routine, something sacred is unraveling. You've become a master illusionist. You don't heal, you rehearse. You rehearse silence, rehearse composure. Rehearse that everything's fine nod that buys you another day away from confrontation. But survival is not peace, it's performance. And you're exhausted, not because you're failing, but because you're succeeding at pretending. You've fooled the world, but the ache knows the truth. There's a cost to faking wholeness. You lose intimacy, you lose authenticity, and worst of all, you lose the raw, trembling version of yourself that actually knows how to heal. Look at Frederick Douglass, not just the orator or the abolitionist, but the man who stood behind pulpits with scars on his back and refused to let eloquence replace truth. He didn't pretend to be fine. He brought the pain with him, into the room, into the sentence, into the world. Because pretending he wasn't wounded would have betrayed the people who still were. And that's the betrayal happening inside you. You abandoned the raw self, the crying self, the self still asking why, and you replaced it with performance. You are a stage with flawless lighting, but the backstage is chaos. Cables sparking, scenery rotting, props collapsing. And yet, the curtain rises every day. You smile, you speak, you move. And when the applause fades, you return to the shadows you never addressed. You think healing means never showing weakness again. But healing demands weakness. It demands unraveling. It demands that you stop editing your emotions for public comfort. You post the highlights, but what about the grief? What about the shame that still lives in your body like a tenant you've never evicted? You've been painting over mold, renovating instead of restoring. It looks new, but the rot is still there, breathing beneath the surface, whispering through the cracks. You didn't rebuild. You redecorated your pain. It's time to stop performing, not for them, but for you. Because the applause you keep chasing is just a distraction from the ache you've refused to name. You think stability is the goal, but stability without truth is just emotional paralysis. Stop convincing yourself that a calendar full of meetings means you're okay. Stop using busyness to drown the voice that keeps whispering, "You're not done yet." So ask yourself this: is the version of you they admire the same version that truly breathes? Or just the one you built to keep them from asking if you're still bleeding? You have mastered survival, but not self-belonging. You made it. You crossed the fires. You endured the abandonment, the betrayal, the moments when the ground gave out from beneath you. You are the proof that survival is possible. But let's be honest, survival is not the same as self-belonging. You've learned how to keep breathing, even when you wanted to disappear. But have you learned how to be with yourself when there's no one else left to fight? You built resilience like a weapon, but now you carry it into rooms that no longer require defense. And still, your shoulders are tense. Your heart flinches when someone gets too close. Because you've mastered surviving others, but you've never learned how to stay with you. You trust yourself in war, but abandon yourself in peace. Think of Harriet Tubman, not just the leader, but the returner. She didn't escape once and disappear. She came back, again and again, not because she had to, but because her soul didn't feel complete until others were free too. But here's the deeper truth. She didn't just deliver them. She belonged to the mission. She belonged to something sacred. You don't even belong to yourself yet. You've become a stranger in your own skin. You take care of responsibilities. You show up for others. But when it's just you, no noise, no praise, no pressure, you feel unanchored, as if your identity is missing its audience. You are a soldier who's forgotten how to sleep without boots on. Even when the battle is over, you lie awake, armor on, eyes open, waiting for a war that's already ended. You don't know how to exhale. You don't know how to rest without guilt. You've been in survival mode for so long, you think peace is suspicious. But belonging isn't just about being accepted by others. It's about being accepted by the version of you who doesn't need to perform. When was the last time you sat with yourself and didn't judge the silence? Didn't try to fix it, rush it, scroll through it, just stayed? You don't need another plan. You need presence, not a new version of you, but a reunion with the version you abandoned when survival became the goal. You don't need to rebuild yourself. You need to return to yourself. Because the deepest healing doesn't happen in motion. It happens in stillness, when there's no one to impress, no threat to outrun, just you, bare, breathless, and finally safe. So I'll ask you, will you keep running into new battles to avoid the old wounds? Or will you finally come home to the only place you were ever meant to belong, yourself? Your silence was never peace. It was strategy. You've been quiet for so long, they think you're calm. They think you've moved on. But silence doesn't always mean healing. Sometimes, silence is just how the wound avoids exposure. You didn't stop talking because you were whole. You stopped talking because explaining became exhausting, because being misunderstood felt worse than staying invisible. So you swallowed the scream, you wore the mask, and you convinced even yourself that your stillness was strength. But peace doesn't twitch beneath the surface. Peace doesn't flinch when someone says, "Are you okay?" What you called peace was just emotional camouflage. You've silenced so many parts of yourself that your inner world now echoes with unspoken grief. And every time you're asked how you feel, you shrug. Not because you don't know, but because you're afraid of what will surface if you answer. Think of Frida Kahlo, the painter whose body betrayed her, whose pain was never quiet. She didn't hide it behind politeness or composure. She bled it into canvas. Her art wasn't decoration, it was declaration, because silence would have killed her before the injuries ever did. You chose the opposite. You made your pain polite, you made your grief invisible, and now your silence doesn't protect you. It haunts you. You are a locked room with perfect furniture, untouched, undisturbed, and lifeless. There's no dust because there's no living, only containment. You mistook the absence of chaos for the presence of peace, but they are not the same. You say, "I just don't want to talk about it," but that phrase is a prison, a way to guard the parts of you that still believe speaking makes it worse. But speaking doesn't make it worse. Silence does. Silence hardens the grief, turns it into habits, and habits into a personality you never meant to become. You think you're protecting others by staying quiet, but the truth? You're avoiding your own reckoning, because if you ever truly said what hurt, you'd have to admit how much of you was shaped by that hurt. Your silence is not a virtue, it's a verdict against your own voice, but you can change that. You can let sound back into your soul. Not shouting, not blaming, not drama, just truth. Gentle, honest, and unedited, because until you speak what you've silenced, you'll keep pretending you're fine in rooms that are killing you slowly. So now the mirror asks, will you keep mistaking your silence for healing, or will you finally let your voice become the doorway back to your freedom? Hurt people don't just hurt people, they hurt themselves. Most you've heard the phrase, hurt people, but they don't just hurt others, they destroy their own futures first, not with violence, but with hesitation, with hyper-independence, with dreams that get delayed because they don't believe they're worthy of the result. And that's you, isn't it? You sabotage your peace before anyone else can. You push love away before it has the chance to leave on its own. You reject opportunities that scare you, not because they're wrong, but because success feels more vulnerable than failure. You'd rather stay broken by your own hand than risk being broken by someone else's. Somewhere along the way, you became both the victim and the executioner. You wear your pain like armor, but wield it like a weapon against yourself. You're not just bleeding, you're reopening the wound every time healing knocks on the door. Look at Winston Churchill, haunted by depression, the black dog, he called it. Even while leading through war, he fought private battles in silence. But he didn't ignore the beast, he named it, faced it. Because pretending he was unshaken would have only fed its hunger. You've been feeding your pain with your own potential, starving your self-worth just to stay in control. You've confused self-destruction for safety. You are a house that locks every door, and then complains about being alone. You build a fire to stay warm, but you burn your own blueprint in the process. What was meant to protect you has become the reason you remain incomplete. You are not dangerous to others, you are dangerous to you. Every time you say, "I don't need anyone," every time you sabotage the good before it can stay, every time you call trust a weakness, you are slowly disappearing into a version of yourself that only knows how to survive pain, not receive peace. And here's the deepest truth. You didn't choose this, but now it's your responsibility to change it, because no one else can reach the self you keep harming. Only you can. The version of you you're avoiding is the one that holds your healing. You don't need more discipline. You need more mercy. For the younger version of you who thought betrayal was the price of love. For the present version of you who flinches at safety because danger feels more familiar. You've punished yourself enough. It didn't protect you. It only prolonged the ache. So now it's your choice. Will you keep living like pain is your compass? Or will you finally forgive yourself for surviving in ways that cost you your future? You keep expecting the world to return. What it never took you walk through life like someone who's been robbed, as if the world owes you something. An apology, a second chance, a parent who should have loved better, a friend who should have stayed, a life that should have gone differently. But here's the truth no one tells you. The world didn't take it. You gave it away. Out of fear, out of confusion, out of a desperate hope to belong. You handed over your voice to stay accepted. You buried your worth so others wouldn't feel threatened. You betrayed yourself softly, quietly, one compromise at a time. And now you wait for someone to return what was never theirs to hold. You can't reclaim your power from a world that never stole it, only from the parts of you that gave it away. You say, "They hurt me." Yes, but they didn't erase you. You did that. Every time you swallowed the truth instead of saying it. Every time you settled for almost because not enough felt safer than being alone. Look at Abraham Lincoln, a man who carried failure after failure like stones in his coat. Defeated, ridiculed, rejected. And yet he didn't wait for the world to see his worth. He carved it out himself, with loss still wet in his eyes. Not because the world gave him permission, but because he stopped waiting for it. You're still standing at the emotional doorsteps of people who don't even live there anymore, still hoping one day they'll wake up, realize what they took, and come running back. But they can't give it back, because they never truly held it. You are a traveler blaming the map for the roads you refuse to take. You're staring at the wreckage of your past, expecting it to rise and rebuild itself. But memories don't return what they never carried. They only echo the parts of you that never spoke up. You're not just hurt, you're waiting, and that wait has become your identity, a passive ache disguised as patience. But listen, closure isn't something they give, it's something you decide. The life you're waiting for is trapped behind the version of you that won't stop waiting. It's time. Time to reclaim the self-respect you outsourced. Time to forgive the past, not because it was right, but because your future is starving without it. You don't need the apology. You need the release, and only you can offer it. So here's what haunts in silence. Will you spend the rest of your life expecting restoration from the very world you abandoned yourself in? Or will you finally return to reclaim the pieces you were always meant to keep? When you stop needing to be untouchable, you become unbreakable. You've spent years proving you can't be hurt, years perfecting your silence, polishing your composure, hardening your edges. You wanted to become unshakable, and in some ways you did. But let's tell the deeper truth. You didn't become strong. You became inaccessible. You traded vulnerability for invincibility. You decided that if no one could touch you, no one could break you. But isolation isn't strength. It's a slow, spiritual starvation. You built a castle to stay safe, then realized you buried yourself alive inside it. Being untouchable is not a sign of healing. It's a sign of hiding. You don't need to be untouchable. You need to be whole, cracked, scarred, raw, but honest. Think of Nelson Mandela, not the symbol, the man. 27 years in prison, forgotten by the world, betrayed by time. And yet, when he walked free, he didn't return with vengeance in his eyes. He returned with vision. He didn't armor up. He opened up, wide enough to lead a country through forgiveness. That wasn't untouchable strength. That was unbreakable clarity. Because real power isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need to control. It doesn't need to push people away. It knows that being seen, truly seen, is where transformation lives. You are a diamond locked in a vault. Safe, admired, but never worn, never felt, never used. What good is brilliance if it never touches the world? What good is light if it's never shared? You thought invincibility would save you, but it just disconnected you from yourself. You made pain the enemy, when pain was the invitation all along, not to crumble, but to connect. You don't need more toughness, you need more truth. Not the kind that intimidates, the kind that liberates. Because the most dangerous lie you ever believed was that you had to be perfect to be worthy of peace. Unbreakable isn't about being untouched. It's about being fully human and choosing to stay open anyway. It's time to put down the mask, the performance, the perfection, and pick up the one thing you've avoided this whole time: presence. Let the world see the whole you, not just the strong you. Let them witness the ache, the wonder, the soft rebellion that lives in your chest, not to impress them, but to finally be you. Because the day you stop needing to be untouchable is the day nothing and no one can break you. So tell me now, will you spend your life performing strength for a world that's already forgotten your act? Or will you finally become the kind of soul that can be seen, scarred, and still sovereign?